I recently saw a video on TikTok that said we should avoid arguing with people who have different views than us because nothing we say can change their mind, and I will tag the author of that clip in this video. This idea, which I will refer to as anti-conflict theology, is false, unbiblical, and dangerous, and I will want to take a few moments to explain why. Anti-conflict theology contradicts the testimony of the Bible, it contradicts the testimony of Christian history, and it contradicts the testimonial evidence that we have to the contrary. Let's briefly address each one of these. First, the idea that we should not engage in argument is unbiblical. We see in Acts 19, 8-9, that Paul went to the synagogues and argued for the truth of Christianity for 3 months. He didn't just go in, present the gospel, and then bounce. He dedicated 3 months to go into those places and reason with the Jewish authorities for the truth of Christianity. After this, we are then told he went and reasoned daily in the hall of Tyrannus, and that he did this for 2 years. This is a continual theme for Paul. We see in Acts 17, 16-18, that Paul reasoned in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there, and this included both Jews and Stoic and Epicurean philosophers. We often see Paul drawing from Greek literary works in order to make his arguments. Similarly, a lot of the letters that Paul writes are him arguing against false doctrine among believers. Not only does Paul display behavior that contradicts anti-conflict theology, Paul explicitly encourages us to do the same thing he does. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 10, 4-5, that the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have the divine power to destroy strongholds. He says we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. If you refuse to respond to arguments raised against Christianity, you aren't destroying arguments and you're not taking captive thoughts that are raised against God. You are letting the powers of this world deceive people uncontested. It is not just Paul that contradicts the anti-conflict theology. Peter also teaches against it. In 1 Peter 3:15, we are told to always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is within us. If you refuse to engage in a rational argument with people who object to Christianity, you are clearly not making any type of defense. Similarly, Jude 1:3 says to contend for the faith that was once delivered to the saints. We also see a refutation of the anti-conflict theology in the Old Testament. Prophets like Isaiah and Amos would often appeal to the created world or moral principles to show the flaws in pagan nations. The entirety of scripture that you claim to follow cries out in protest at your anti-conflict theology. This brings me to my second point, which is the entire history of Christianity was filled with Christians arguing with non-believers. If you look at the writings of early church fathers such as Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, Athanasius, Ignatius, Irenaeus, Melito of Sardis, the early church was fiercely contending for the Christian faith against pagans and Jews. If Paul argued with people, and all the early Christians were arguing with people, where does this anti-conflict theology come from? The sole reasoning presented for it is that it would not change anybody's mind. And this brings me to my final point, which is that the testimonial evidence shows this claim is false. Many famous Christian writers were once atheists who later came to Christianity because they saw the evidence. C.S. Lewis was an atheist who came to Christianity because of things like the moral argument and the arguments put forth by his friend J.R.R. Tolkien. Lee Strobel, author of The Case for Christ, was an atheist who later converted to Christianity after being exposed to the evidence. Nabil Qureshi, author of Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, left Islam after years of religious debate with his friend David Wood, who was trying to convince him that Christianity is true. There are many more examples, but I think this is sufficient to make my point. Not only that, but there are many people, like myself, who regularly engage in religious debate with non-believers and know people who have become Christians because they were presented evidence for it. There are Christian academics like William Lane Craig, J.P. Moreland, and Mike Licona who have dedicated their lives to arguing with non-believers, and they will tell you the same thing I am telling you, which is that they know people who have come to the faith because of their arguments. To summarize everything I've said so far, the idea that we shouldn't argue with people about religious differences contradicts what we see displayed by the authors of the New Testament, it contradicts what we see in early Christian history, and it contradicts the testimonial evidence of people who have come to the faith because of arguments and reason. Finally, this anti-conflict theology is extremely dangerous. Proverbs 18:17 says the first to speak their case seems right until someone comes forward to question them. There are many people presenting a case against Christianity, and they will seem right unless someone comes and questions them. I will finish with a quote by C.S. Lewis. Quote, "To be ignorant and simple now, not to be able to meet the enemies on their own ground, would be to throw down our weapons and to betray our uneducated brethren, who have, under God, no defense but us, against the intellectual attacks of the heathen. Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered."